there is a paradigm shift going on in the note taking space, particularly around what the shelf life of a note is. And I kind of want to address the idea of, and this is going to edge partially into sci fi territory, partially into reality with what we can do with technology that exists today, and mainly just me opining on the early stages of what I think could be a really monumental idea if implemented correctly. So let's talk about second brains thinking. What if a second brain could think? If you watch this channel, you know that I focus a lot on personal knowledge management. I focus a lot on this idea of being able to take a networked group of nodes and kind of like split thoughts into many different participles, right? Like kind of like this idea of an idea can be revisited later at a later date and reconnected to something else in the graph that can give it a new life, a new lease on life, and change the scoping of the idea. So I've been playing around with the concept of for a while of what if these notes could themselves create new notes. And basically what I mean by this is that I've realized that a lot of the notes that I create, I still have to be the creative element to go back in and form the relationships between these notes. I have to be the one that drafts up a new note from scratch, basically. But I do think that after a while, you reach a critical density within these graphs where you can start to say like, hey, I have enough on this topic that I should be able to use artificial intelligence or some other intelligent being to summarize all of this information and create a brand new form of information. So let's talk a little bit about that today. The first thing I want to talk about is that note reading, right? So this kind of concept of what happens if we take two notes and create a child note, much like the sexual reproduction of animals in the real world, we would want there to be a pleasant surprise of new child ideas that pop out of existing ideas. So I was actually able to run some tests with this using GPT-3. I have the prompts that I used, and we'll run through them, and I'll show you kind of where my thought process was, what worked and what didn't work, and probably what I'm going to take forward with this project in terms of like how I'm going to think about it in my own Obsidian ecosystem. So the first thing that I tried to do was basically throw two notes into a prompt and then say to the prompt itself, like, hey, mix and match these two notes, try and find similarities, interesting things to talk about, and then generate a thesis about it. So for one, for example, was this actual note that I wrote about the concept of what I was thinking about here with this whole second brain thing, which is that a second brain should by all rights be able to think for itself. But what is thinking in this case? The brain is a prediction engine that seems to be self-referential between conscious and unconscious stimuli. What I meant by this is that when you are a person and you are actively thinking about things, you're also at the same time unconsciously thinking about many more things. For example, I'm going to now draw attention to your body positioning, right? Like, where are you in physical space? You, the viewer right now, are either sitting on a chair or standing up or listening to this video on a walk. Either way, your body is doing something while your ears are doing something else, which is processing my voice, and your eyes might be processing this video, for example. So I was thinking that this kind of stimuli is interesting because it kind of moves between this unconscious and conscious barrier. But then what I also meant by a prediction engine that's self-referential is that sometimes this stimuli will draw your attention. You'll be like, oh shit, I left the oven on, or oh right, I had a thing at 5 o'clock, when now the unconscious stimuli of time moving forward and it being 5 o'clock is now important to me all of a sudden. So the prediction engine part is also being able to say like, hey, if it is 5 o'clock, I should go do this because this is the thing that I said I would do at 5 o'clock. So I think that the brain is a multimodal kind of prediction network. We talked a little bit about this in a previous video when we went over a tweet from Ilya Sutskever, where he said, given that the brain is just a bunch of big matrix vector products, linear algebra deserves more appreciation. So basically, my thought process was that if we have a sufficiently smart AI, we can use our notes as random stimuli to spark brand new generational allele creation, similar to kind of like sexual reproduction of ideas. In addition, the brain holds concepts in many different forms. Text is a kind of flatland of the data really captured in the brain. To truly create a second brain means slow evolutionary modules that can engage with each other when operational, each conducting its own stack. What I meant by this is basically much like the human brain has a lot of modules that do different things. We have our occipital lobe that focuses on our eyes. We have the parietal lobe, the temporal lobe, the occipital lobe, the hippocampus, the frontal lobe, and all of these parts of the brain handle different tasks for the human mind, basically. So this is kind of like evolutionary modules that were slowly created over time, and I think that when it specifically comes to text. Text is a module that is useful in a lot of different modules of the brain, where basically you can take text data and pass it through the occipital lobe and then turn it into a voice in your head and then pass it through your hippocampus to see how you feel about that. Like imagine the last tweet that you read that made you really angry and you don't necessarily know why you were so angry by it. Anyway, so reading a note and summarizing it, finding similar notes based on the content. These are just different ideas for modules, and we're going to get a little bit into the test that I kind of pursued a little bit deeper in a second. Chatbot with a note system, fetching broader data from the web about a note, or writing programs based on the note that do something and solve the problem in the note, or like open-ended tasks that always include switching inertia. If you watched my video on Slack in this channel, you'll know that we talked about context inertia switching, and this is relating to that. Reading a few notes at a time and writing a random note tagged as a child thought. This is the one in particular we're going to be paying attention to, but I do think that all of these could be particularly valuable, especially talking about the value of transformers in general. This note too, I literally just used the random note functionality here in Obsidian. You see this open random note that I'm highlighting over here, and I was able to just open a random note that like opens any kind of random note that you can kind of see in Obsidian. So what I was thinking was that I just would take this random note, take this other idea, and see if it could do an overlap. And the instructions that I gave GPT-3, DaVinci, were read parent 1 and read parent 2 to compose a child thesis combining the two for a literature 501 class in college. My reasoning behind this literature 501 class in college is that I wanted it to write in kind of like an essay format where it needed to be thesis and kind of prove a point. What I saw though was that it was really interested in the first one because the first one was shaped much more like an argument. So this one reads more like a college paper than this one does, which is just a collection of tweets that I thought were interesting about this person named Vuthric working on Unreal Engine 5. So the child thesis, in short, is just basically a repetition of what I have written above. So that wasn't good. I wasn't really happy with this outcome. I wasn't able to really tweak the parameters to find something that would really kind of unstuck the model from paying attention to too much of one parent as opposed to the other. Even when I told it to combine parent 1 and parent 2, it just didn't really want to do such a thing. So then I kind of thought, okay, let me split this into a little bit more of a step-by-step process. So the first thing that I did was I said, hey, I'm going to take that same random note and I'm going to summarize it into a one-line title. So then I summarized this title into a one-line kind of topic. So it takes like, the text from all of these tweets, which is kind of like update on my slime game, or, a dual rest position fields based on advected texture projection. Advected texture projection. So the title that GPT-3 came up with was Vuthric's UE5 game development highlights. So then I was like, okay, cool. So now I have a concept which is just a very singular concept. And now I want to combine two distinct topics and see what GPT-3 can come up with. So in this case, I chose Unreal Engine 5, which was from above, and Motionless in White album from the band Motionless in White. And this is the essay that GPT-3 came up with. I didn't write this. The only thing that I gave it was this title, and I told it to give it an instruction to write an essay including both of them. Unreal Engine 5 is a powerful game engine that is developed by Epic Games. While it has been used in a number of high-profile games, including the Gears of War and Unreal Tournament franchises, its potential for creating stunning visual experiences has only begun to be explored. Motionless in White's new album, Graveyard Shift, provides a perfect example of this potential. The album's artwork was created using Unreal Engine 5, and the result is an incredibly atmospheric and eerie experience that makes you feel like you're walking through a real graveyard at night. The use of Unreal Engine 5 allows for some truly impressive lighting effects which are essential to the mood of Graveyard Shift. Everywhere you look, there are sources of light, from the moon to the lanterns hanging from the gravestones, and each one casts a different kind of shadow. This gives the environment a sense of depth and realism that would be impossible to achieve with traditional 2D art methods. In addition to the wonderful lighting, Unreal Engine 5 allows for realistic textures and materials. Every tombstone and leaf looks amazingly lifelike, making it easy to get lost in the world of the album artwork. It's clear to see that a lot of care and attention went into making sure that every detail is as perfect as possible, and it really pays ... So what you see here is that this feels real, right? Like you could almost imagine reading this as like an Unreal Engine 5 press release or a Motionless in White press release where they're talking about like the making of their album. But this is fake. Unreal Engine, let's actually look at the cover for the Graveyard Shift album and see what they actually came up with. So this is the real cover for the Graveyard Shift Motionless in White album. And obviously it is nothing like the thing that GPT-3 just described, right? It's just a person, a child with ash or soot, it looks like, around their eyes in the Motionless in White Graveyard Shift. No tombstones, no lanterns, and use of lighting. So the thing about that I think that's interesting about the output here particularly is that hallucination is generally a bad thing with these models. Like we try and limit the hallucinations, but with this note thing, I wanted it to hallucinate. I think that hallucination in this case especially if it's tagged. So imagine that this is like tagged, let's say like hashtag machine generated. So like if you see this tag of machine generated, you'll know not to take it too seriously, but to just use it as a creative jumping off point. So you're like, oh wow, now I know a little bit more about what Unreal Engine 5 might be able to do if they made the album cover for this Motionless and White album, right? In reality. So I think it just gives you the ability to kind of like creatively iterate on ideas without having to do much work. So this was the kind of two-step process: was summarize the note that it's currently seeing into something that's like really short and really topical, and then combining those two topics and not giving it anything else, which is really important so it doesn't jump too heavily into what the original note was about, and then having it basically generate a new child from those two concepts. So this, to me, is kind of like summarized here: source, summary, title, mix into one, turn into a full piece with a very high temperature, including randomness. I think that this main use for this is seeding creativity. It basically can help us augment static memory with AI to form new insights, right? So we will be able to take this kind of like giant graph of random notes and then use them together to make a brand new thing. And the reason that we can do that is because we're leveraging transformers. And I've talked about transformers many times on this channel. But basically, the concept is that there's a giant latent space of a lot of different ideas that are related to each other with different weights. And we can kind of move between the latent space and find brand new things that we wouldn't necessarily be able to discover on our own, given our own human brain kind of setup. So this, I think, opens up the second kind of point, which I want to get to. And this is still kind of theoretical. I haven't come up with a solution for this one just yet, but discriminators and natural selection. So in the real world, natural selection functions to change species by forcing them to adapt by killing off bad genes. Creatures will adapt to the environment in which they find themselves, and these adaptations will eliminate certain traits and favor others. So I would be really interested in having that be a thing too with this. And some really high level ideas I have about it are just having another prompt that's basically whole job is to verify the truthfulness of a statement, or the veracity of a statement would be an easier one, but also one that kind of like questions the creativity of it, tries to really dive into it and says like, hey, like, is this good enough to pass? With stenography, I do a similar task where I have to add some discriminators to my responses to make sure that I'm giving good code responses back to the user. Certain responses are just better than others, and being able to see which ones are better than others by like being able to use this discriminator has been a proven technique that I've been able to implement in the past, and am looking forward to maybe implementing with this. So I want to leave this video off with a series of open questions because this is still very much early research for me, and I kind of just wanted to talk about this idea that I've been kind of playing with for the past week, especially because I think my note taking thing is basically reaching critical mass. My main graph is over 7,000 notes, as you can see here, and all of these nodes are pretty densely connected, and I would love to see new random connections pop up that I don't have to manually forge myself by this gardening process. So I'm really excited to get my second brain to maybe think for itself in the future. Anyway, so here are some open questions that I'm asking myself now, and kind of maybe thinking about how to take this forward in the next couple months. So using current notes to make new notes with transformers is kind of something that we discussed above, but like, what are the implications of that? Because a lot of these notes aren't going to be as quality as what a human could create, but they're going to be different. And I think that different is a plus, but the quality loss is obviously a minus. So it's going to be really interesting to see how these two interact with each other. So the idea, the main premise, of course, is that what is the manual labor of inventing new ideas? Is this something that when automated will just mean that we have a bunch of ideas to curate against, as opposed to actually create from scratch? I think the benefit of having a critical mass graph like the one I do in my main vault for Obsidian is that I already have so much data in here that I really like and have taken the time to build down into. So I want this graph to start working for itself. I want it to kind of be like an investment opportunity where it's like, oh, I invested $5 into this, and then if I get a return of 5% a year, I'll have like $10 in the next 6 years, right? So I want to be able to basically set up a cron job that can kind of just go through and invent new ideas for me that will end up in a curation inbox at the end of the week that I just go through and be like, that's good, that's bad, that's good, that's bad, that's good, that's bad. And then the graph will be able to grow without me having to manually deal with it over time. And ideally, eventually you'd be able to fine tune your own graph as well to create something that evolves by itself forever, I guess, because it would continue to get bigger. Do all words have the same density to them? This is kind of like this idea of what I was talking about with the veracity of the Motionless and White kind of writing from scratch thing that we saw here, where this is a lie, right? Like, it feels all of these words feel real. The grammar checks out. It uses plausibility as a benefit, but it's not real, right? So like being able to check against the density of the real world. And unfortunately, I would use Google for this, but Google doesn't have a good search API and they block it from people, which I think is a huge problem, especially in this era that we're kind of heading into with AI, and kind of like shows how they're just like planning on locking everything down. But there is a, I think there are other APIs like Bing and stuff that one might be interested in using to kind of like check and say like, hey, is this true? Like, can we fact check this even just slightly? So this is kind of an open question for me as well. And then what happens with book quotes? I think this is the kind of first thing that I want to try, is to say like, this is a real kind of use case that I think people would end up paying for, is like, what is the kind of shared density between multiple books? And what does it mean when you can kind of take the thesis of this author and take the thesis of that author and not get too caught up in their arguments, but really be able to see the area in between. So this is a open field of research. I don't know exactly where I'll be taking this in the next couple weeks to months or whatever, but I do think it's really cool. I do think it's going to be helpful, and I will update when I have updates for this. So thank you for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe and do all that stuff if you want to stick around with this kind of content about talking about Transformers, new ideas, Obsidian, PKM books, and understanding the world a little bit better through kind of just like knowledge. So thanks for watching. I've been Bram. You've been you. Have a wonderful day. Bye.